The fellow in the back there.
Yeah.
Good day. There are those who say that within the next 50 years, if we don't, as humankind, attain space, that we'll have missed our opportunity. How does the panel feel about this?
No. May I?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Because I've got a novel that just never generated, and it's based on that question. Here's the way it is. We could have had a moon base. We could have had orbital power generators, and it would have gone from there, because the orbital power generators would have given us the spacecraft, and we'd have moved on that. Cost would be 10 years of what we spend on cosmetics. That we could have done in the past 10 or 20 years. What it costs if we don't get it in the next 50 years goes something like this. You don't get a dark ages. You can't have a dark ages. It's too easy to make information. It's too easy to hide a computer disk and make millions. You never lose the information. That's point one. Point two is computers have gotten good enough that Alexander the Great could have ruled the world. He conquered a large part of the world, and so have others, but they never had what it took to rule. They didn't have the communications. We've got the communications. So let me postulate for you, say call it the United Nations. Someone takes over the United Nations, and presently he's ruling the world in detail, using the computers. Call him Waldemar the First, because that's the way he is in my head. Waldemar the 11th, or 9th, or 13th, or anything you like, but call him Waldemar the 11th, grows up with access to all of the information we've got today, including specifically what it takes to build a space program. He knows how to build a space program, starting with the orbital satellites and the spacecraft to launch them. He knows it could have been done for the cost of cosmetics once upon a time. What it costs in his time, his impoverished time, with all the resources gone or hard to get, is approximately what it costs to keep 100 million people alive. And that, by his time, might well be the population of Australia. Remember, Waldemar the 11th now controls all the media. He can take all the resources away from everyone in Australia, leaving it to die, and it never makes the news. And now he can build a space program. My point here is that we're going to space.
Yeah.
But if we don't do it in the next 50 years, you're going to hate the results. It's going to make dictatorship look good, and we may never get out from under.
I'd like to challenge your premise, which is that the computer technology would allow this guy to rule the world. It seems to me that computer technology has been shown to work more against the tyrants than for them. I mean, if you're able to communicate back and forth and disseminate information back and forth that the people who would attempt to rule you cannot control, then you can't be effectively ruled.
This is exactly what my new book is about, the notion that if we have a system in which information flows freely, the four great social innovations of Western civilization, science, free markets, justice, and democracy, all four rely upon the participants having relatively free and open access to information so that they can participate in the adversarial process. If the adversarial process A does not collapse from starvation by us living in a closed society, even one that's closed for idealistic reasons like encryption, or on the other hand, if the civilization does not fly apart centrifugally into a chaos of self-righteous individualists, then we have the means to have a civilization that would use information to maintain its democracy. But there's a problem. Larry's scenario for eventually getting out into space assumes a dictatorship. If your scenario is right and the dictatorship is prevented by people following my advice in my nonfiction book, then we might have an increasingly impoverished democracy, which would never go into space. That is a bizarre and somewhat plausible notion, and somewhat disturbing.
I actually think that I think we will get into space. We're going to go back. I have no doubts. But I also think that if we didn't go within the next 50 years, there is a possibility that it wouldn't be as bad as they think. I mean, if you think about how much it costs to send the recent robot to Mars, that was the cost of like a movie, you know, making a film, and not Titanic. It was a cheap movie. And if you can compare that to how much it cost us to get to the moon back, which was an extraordinary feat. Absolutely amazing that we did that before we had portable computers and such like that.
But what happens if we create a society that doesn't want to go into space, that just wants to watch movies?
That's different.
I use movies, I don't use cosmetics, I go with Larry.
I'll tell you one thing that I think is preventing us from getting into space is the fact that every time anybody goes into space, they've got to have a television camera attached to them. And, you know, try imagining what exploring the new world would have been like if every time somebody stubbed their toe or got killed by an Indian or drowned or something, that you had the news media in Isabella, Spain saying, "My God, somebody died. What can we do about this?"
Well, that's saying information is a bad thing then, right?
To a certain extent, I'm not sure that it's such a red-hot idea to have everybody watching the intimate details of exploration.
And we're back to Monica again.
Okay, there's a lot of thoughts here. I'm going to start from the right, and then we'll try and keep your comments short because time is short.
Well, you guys were talking about the democratization of information. When do you think that's going to happen? Because there is right now an elite. There are so many people who don't have computers, that don't have access to it, that don't have
It's happening now, and the elite was self-chosen.
But how soon do you think?
Those people will be helping us put our coats on.
When an advanced computer and world internet access costs less for some third world citizen using satellite uplinks than their supply of clean water, we had better have a program of inclusion in mind. Now, whether this inclusion program uses principles of free markets or goody two-shoes approaches is less significant to me than that we should agree upon an end goal. We don't want angry people with powers like that in this world. I'm all in favor of discussing how, but the children have got to be fed.
Gentleman, right there.
Yes, I'm following up on that question. I'd like to challenge the basic idea that things are in fact very different than they were for our grandparents. Taking the thought experiment, if you randomly sampled the 4.2 billion people on planet Earth and said, how different is life from your grandparents? I'd like to explore that. And the second idea I'd like to challenge is that, in fact, most people are not morons. Working at one of the large, respected computer companies, being within the office that's dealing with the year 2000 problem, I think that one could put together a pretty good thesis that, in fact, people stumble around as stupidly as they possibly can, up to the point where they have to put on their thinking caps and say, all right, now a crisis is upon us and we have to respond to it.
I'll give you just one statistic to refute your first point about how we're not different and our lives are not different from others. First off, the two great artworks of our century. If you define visual artwork, great art, as art that everybody gets to see and that changes their attitudes dramatically, were created by physicists. The atom bomb, which changed our love affair with war, and the image of the Earth floating in space, which changed our attitude towards this island planet, which is no longer a map, a flat map. But the other thing that's different is you ask those 6 billion people out there, what fraction of them have personally experienced armed conflict and war? It is at the vastly lowest level in all of human history, despite the horrors that this century has shown. The fraction of humans alive today who have experienced savage repression, or war, or rape, or famine, is at an all-time low, and a major statistically long-time low. And this is irrefutable, and we are different.
Gentleman over in the corner.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. I was just wondering, speaking of populations, a lot of different authors have had different extrapolations on the population of the Earth in 25, 50 years. Island has Asimov, Franklin had
extrapolation and stuff. I was just wondering how, now that, we're in year 2000, I don't know if it's like a big important day or not, but how all you authors are feeling about, the population of the Earth and what that's going to be effect on, how life's going to be. Do we have to do, like Asimov said, we have to...
You mean the effect of the year 2000 on us?
No. I mean,
Effect of population?
Years or so. What population that's going to affect, people living on the Earth and the quality of life, or are we going to have to all eat plants or something like that? Or is there...
Just because of the press of humanity, is that what you're saying?
Something has to be done about the population explosion. There's no doubt about it. Something has to be done.
Well, there is no population explosion anymore, for one thing. It's going to stabilize at about 10 billion people in about 20 or 30 years.
The question is, will they all want television?
Educating girls has been the only and largest effect on population. When you, for every grade level, you increase the education of girls, they decrease the number of offspring they have. Although I have a science fiction scenario for a pill that males would take, and that's the pill that would kill their gynosperm, so they only have boys.
But they wouldn't take it.
The macho guys would take it, and their countries would wind up being A, dangerous for a short time, and B, depopulated. And we'd all have to give our daughters karate lessons, as I am. The point is that the population thing, A, if we all became vegetarians, but B, consider this. There are a lot of Blade Runner scenarios in which things are going bad. Soylent Green. Consider the problems that we might face if we succeed, if we are wise. Can you imagine a world filled with 8 billion tourists? I mean, there are penalties to success. It will be a better world, but an infuriating one.
That's actually, my joke about television wasn't entirely a joke. We're very proud of the fact that countries like China, especially now in the news, and Russia eventually, once it gets its act together, are going to be capitalist countries. But if they're all capitalist countries the way we're capitalist countries, where are the resources coming from? We already use 6 times what our population is. And you know the statistic I'm talking about. What, 5% of the population, 30% of the world's resources? Imagine China doing the same thing.
Yeah, I'm all for the Chinese staying as communists because it's a competitive world, and I'd like them to be uncompetitive. This gentleman right here with the beard.
With respect to Mr. Niven's idea of the world dictator,
Could you speak up, please?
With respect to Mr. Niven's idea of the world dictator who takes this, it reminded me of Jared Diamond's book, Gun, Germs, and Steel, which he pointed out that a universal ruler essentially was responsible for just the opposite. In China, in the 1400s, they had an ocean-going fleet that was quite capable of reaching the New World, and they could have colonized the west coast of the United States. But this one emperor decided this was a waste of time.
No, sir. The bureaucracy did it.
Well, whatever it was a centralized. His idea was that one centralized control.
Suppression of diversity and suppression of progress has always been on the agenda of certain types of culture. That's why in this new Foundation universe that Greg Bear and Greg Benford wrote the first 2 books in the new Foundation trilogy. I'm now finishing, as we speak. In about a week I'll be finished with Foundation Triumphant, the last book in this series. And I came to realize while writing this book that Isaac Asimov's robots, when they designed the Galactic Empire, they were not thinking of Rome. They were thinking of China. And down to the eunuchs, the court eunuchs, who are the robots themselves. So it's an interesting thing, and I agree with you. It would take a special kind of dictator, one with great enthusiasm, perhaps a little loony.
We have about 2 minutes.
Waldemar.
Does anybody have any final comments? Anybody up here have any final comments? Or shall we just give it?
How about give it to the audience?
Let's give it to the audience. Okay.
Getting back to Mr. Ross's point that humanity is getting better, and I would agree. I can go back 60 years to my teenage years. And people are better now. But in the 60 years, I've noticed that something can come out of left field that can discombobulate everything, all the trends you're speaking of. And you don't know how safe it was to live in New York City in 1938. You could sleep in Central Park. You had only one lock on your door. There was very little violent crime. And the one factor that nobody anticipated was dope, and the effect it would have on a small segment. And I could walk into the New York Times building, then any office,